Stretch out the dreams from my mind. Granny's got the scoop, let's unwind. Birds are chirping, singing their tune. Mystery of the day coming soon. Cup of tea and a buttered scone. Start the day, we're never alone. Good morning, rise and shine. Granny's here with stories so fine. Good morning, off we go. To greet the world with a happy glow.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful morning so far, and I pray that you're going to have a wonderful day. Grab your coffee, your tea, your cappuccino, your espresso, whatever it is that you drink. Maybe it's juice. And let's get started. We are going to start out our day with Spotlight on the Missing with Granny. Our first one is Timothy Hayberger. I think that's right, Hayberger. Missing since January 21st, 2025. He was last seen in Nashville, Tennessee. He's a 17-year-old male. He's 5 feet 7 inches tall, 127 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. If anybody knows anything, please call the Nashville Police Department, 911, or 1-800-TBI-FIND. We need to bring our kids home, guys. They're our future. Our next one is Ivana Ramsey. Ivana's been missing since September 26, 2024. She was last seen in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She's a 16-year-old female, 5 feet 3 inches tall, 195 pounds, black hair, and brown eyes. If anybody knows anything about Ivana, where she is, why she went missing, anything, any information, please call the Chattanooga Police Department, 911, or 1-800-TBI-FIND. Thank you so much, guys. Today's session is going to be talking about Phoenix Eichner, the suspect for the FSU tragedy, right? Guys, these school tragedies just break my heart. They really do. And it always boils down to mental health, doesn't it? It does every single time. Today, we're going to look at Phoenix's biography. It's been released in documents. I want to give Law and Crime the credit, guys. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and listen to a video talking about his biography. Make sure you can see everything good. All right.
Right now, the alleged shooter at Florida State who killed 2 people is not cooperating with law enforcement. But Phoenix Eichner seems to have spent a lot of time trying to prove to law enforcement in Tallahassee, Florida, that he was worthy of helping the local sheriff's office. We've obtained an application that Eichner once wrote to the Leon County Sheriff's Office trying to get on its Youth Advisory Council. In that application, he talks about how he thinks he had a tough childhood, and you'll want to hear what he has to say on that part of it. Right now, Eichner is no friend to law enforcement. In fact, he's alleged to be exactly the opposite, an alleged killer who had extremist ideas and decided to take it out on innocent people on the campus of Florida State. Police say on April 17th, Eichner opened fire just before noon on the Tallahassee campus near the Student Union. Police say he killed 2 people and shot 5 others. The 2 victims he allegedly killed, they weren't students, they worked in food services at Florida State. They were both fathers. One is Robert Morales. He worked on the FSU campus in dining services. The other is Tiru Chaba. He was a father of 2 who worked for a food vendor and was visiting the FSU campus the day that Eichner allegedly opened fire. His family is now raising questions through an attorney about the investigation. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Police shot Eichner.
So, guys, I just want to say that Let's keep the victims in this tragedy in our prayers and their families. Um, it's not only these two men and their families, they left behind families, but the 5 others that were, hit and their families, not to mention all of the students that were right there seeing all this. And even if they didn't see it, guys, a lockdown at a school, knowing that, they have an active shooter on campus cannot be an easy thing. I think it's very traumatizing for these kids and their families. Can you imagine having a child that goes there and then you hear about this, you race there and you're waiting hours and hours and hours before you're able to hear anything about your child? It's horrible. It's horrible, guys. So let's keep all these people in our prayers, okay?
In the jaw. They say he was not cooperating with their demands to put his guns down. Eichner is still in the hospital at the time of this recording. It's unclear how long he will be in the hospital, but police say he will be charged when he's released by doctors. Police say they can't speak to the specifics of the charges, but they will be up to and include first-degree murder. Not only is a school shooting shocking, a big twist in this story early was how familiar the local sheriff's office was with Phoenix Eichner. The shooter's stepmom is a Leon County sheriff's deputy. She worked for the agency for nearly 20 years. Last March, she was Employee of the Month for LCSO. The sheriff's office says that Deputy Eichner took personal leave in the wake of the news. She is most recently a school resource officer at a middle school, according to local media. Now,
And yes, we know that he used one of her personal firearms, right? But this family needs our prayers as well. Because I am sure, guys, that the last thing they thought would be that this young man would take the lives of so many. Were there red flags? Were they responsible? Did she not have her firearm locked up? All those things, guys, are going to come out, right? All that's going to come out. The police have to do their investigation. They have to dot their I's, cross their T's. We need to be patient, okay? We need to be patient.
Unclear if she will face charges because one of the guns that police say Eichner used in the shooting was his deputy stepmom's. It was a gun that was once her service weapon, but now she owned it for personal use. The sheriff said that the shooter was once a member of his agency's Youth Advisory Council. It's a group that's supposed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and local youth. But as we have dug deeper into the alleged shooter's past, we've uncovered that he was much more than just a young student who wanted to help local law enforcement. These are pages related to Phoenix Eichner's application to be on the Youth Advisory Council in 2021 when he was a junior in high school. He was around 16 years old. He talks about problems that he sees in society when it comes to issues like race, and he talks about his childhood. We dug through court records in Leon County, Florida, and we have found a paper trail that shows that this alleged shooter was at the center of a custody dispute for years between his parents. This is a picture of the shooter's biological mom. Her name is Anne Marie Erickson. This is a picture of her related to an unrelated case in 2013. Well, if you watch our content here on Law and Crime, you know just how rampant crime is right now. And that is especially true when it comes to cybercrime. That is growing more dangerous and widespread, and it's targeting businesses like never before. Listen to this in Anne Marie Erickson. We went through dozens of pages of the court documents that detail a tumultuous divorce and custody battle involving the alleged shooter when they were young. Now, the other name listed as a plaintiff is Christian Gunnar Erickson. It has been reported that the alleged shooter changed his name to Phoenix Eichner from Christian in 2020 to have a name associated with his biological dad's family, Christopher Eichner, who is married to the LCSO deputy that the sheriff named Jessica Eichner. Now, the shooter's biological mom claimed in the lawsuit that Phoenix was the victim of psychological and emotional abuse from the time he was 11 years old. The suit demanded damages that would go into a college fund for the minor who would grow up to become the alleged FSU shooter, Phoenix Eichner. According to Leon County court records, the case was eventually dismissed. We found this document filed in Leon County that shows in 2016, the shooter's mom was convicted of a charge of removing a minor from the state in failure to return a minor. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Erickson spent 30 days in prison and she was put on 2 years probation. Erickson posted this recently on Facebook saying, quote, "Love being my son, Christian Gunner, in parentheses, Phoenix, mother." So let's dive into this youth group application from 2021 that provides even more context about who Phoenix Eichner is. Eichner writes a biography about his life, which he starts by saying, quote, "I have been through more than most people." He talks about growing up, splitting time between his biological parents who had to hand him over at a local police station. And he also talks about an incident when he was 10 years old and he had to split his spring break between his mom and his dad. You might remember we were just talking about that case that landed his biological mom in prison in 2016, where she was convicted of removing a minor from the state in failure to return a minor. That very well may have been related to this story here. Eichner talks about how for the second half of his spring break, he was going to go with his mom. And he says that he was told for that part of the spring break, he was going to go to Disney, but instead he and his mom went on a plane and they flew to Norway and stayed there for more than 100 days. Eventually that became a legal issue. He says that he was given back to his biological father in Norway, then brought back to the US. And as we talked about, his mom was charged and convicted in that case. Eichner talks about needing counseling after that. And he says that he then joined his high school's JROTC when he was in high school, and he had plans to join the Air Force when he graduated with the hopes of one day becoming a teacher. Eichner did not join the military after high school. He eventually enrolled at Florida State, where he would eventually become an alleged school shooter. And
So guys, I want to address one thing here. This young man says he's been through a lot more than most people. I beg to disagree on that. I'm not trying to downplay what he's been through, but what he put these students through when he did this was much more than he'd ever been through. His mother took him to Norway, and it sounds like he didn't like that. He would rather be with his father. I get that, right? I get that. There was, custody battle there going on, and I understand that, and that is hard on children. I get that. But when you compare to what he did to these other children's lives, these other young people's lives, when you compare other young people going through SA, being kidnapped, that kind of thing, what he went through doesn't compare. So, like I said, I'm not trying to downplay what he went through. Not at all. But maybe his parents should have realized that he needed some help. Because I think a silver lining, whenever you go through a tragedy, is that you begin to recognize, wow, there are other people out there who have it much worse than I do. I can do this. I can make it through. I can, that kind of thing. But that's not the way he's talking, right? He's dwelling on the pain that he went through this dramatic divorce and custody.
Killer. Also in the application, Eichner is asked why he wants to become a member of this youth group. And he says, quote, "I can try and help Tallahassee become one of the best places for teenagers to live, grow up, and plant family roots." The application then asks him a question about one issue of importance in the country, to which he replies, race relations. He says, quote, "I am passionate about this issue because it is a driven factor in the political landscape of today. For example, at my school, there is a clash between the races and that each race feels the opposite race is ignorant. There is no communication or dialogue between them. I believe that race sensitivity should go both ways. We don't need to focus on one race being better or need different treatment than another. This breeds issues within the classroom at my school and adds fuel to the fire. I think that the Youth Advisory Council could help bridge this gap/issue." The application shows that a school resource deputy endorsed Eichner, saying, quote, "Phoenix has strong character and would be a strong member of the youth council. He wants to help bridge gaps within our community to help make it a better place to reside." Years later, Eichner would allegedly prove to be the exact opposite of that assessment. At the time of the application, Eichner was under the age of 21, so his stepmom, Leon County Sheriff's Deputy Jessica Eichner, signed the document for him. Also included in the document was an acceptance letter to the council by Leon County Sheriff Walt McNeil, who said the application process was incredibly competitive, but Eichner showed a dedication to service with strong leadership skills. Less than 5 years after that letter, the sheriff would be at a podium saying this about Phoenix Eichner.
The shooter is 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner, and he's the son of a Leon County Sheriff deputy. Our Deputy Eichner, has been with the Leon County Sheriff's Office for over 18 years. She has a tremendous job that she's done. Her service to this community has been exceptional. Unfortunately, her son had access to one of her weapons, and that was one of the weapons that was found at the scene. And we will continue that investigation into how that weapon was used and what other weapons perhaps he may have had access to. The alleged shooter was also a long-standing member of the Leon County Sheriff's Office Citizen Advisory or Youth Advisory Council.
As much of a shock as it may be to Phoenix Eichner's family and the local law enforcement community that he is alleged to have committed this school shooting, those who knew him as a classmate have very different feelings. USA Today spoke to a college classmate who said that Eichner made it clear to the class that he had guns. The student went on to say, quote, "It's so sad and so shocking. Then to see it was him, I'm sadly not surprised." I remember back in April when this shooting happened and the sheriff said the name Phoenix Eichner, and I did an internet search of that name. And one of the first things to come up was his name quoted in an article for a Florida State newspaper related to a political rally from earlier this year. The article was about an anti-Trump protest on campus, and Eichner was there as a counter-protester. He was quoted saying, "These people are usually pretty entertaining, usually not for good reasons. I think it's a little too late. He, Trump, is already going to be inaugurated on January 20th, and there's not really much you can do unless you outright revolt, and I don't think anyone wants that." This is some of the audio from that interview with FSUnews.com.
There's not really much you can do unless you're going to outright revolt. So
exactly.
I don't think anybody wants that.
Yeah.
We all want to go home.
Yeah.
The journalist who spoke to Eichner, Justice Ulrich, says there isn't much he remembers that was out of the ordinary about Eichner on that day. Their interaction lasted only a couple of minutes. Eichner is alleged to have killed 2 people in the shooting. One was 57-year-old Robert Morales, a beloved figure on the FSU campus who worked in dining. His brother announced his death in a post on X. He wrote that Morales loved Florida State, his wife, and his daughter. The other victim is Tiru Chaba. He lived in South Carolina. He worked for a food service company. His family's attorneys held a news conference this week on the FSU campus calling for more transparency in the investigation. Here's a clip from WTXL TV.
Now it's time to try to get some answers to the why and the what.
The lawyers say they're not threatening legal action at the moment, but they do say they want to make sure they get information about this case. It's unclear how long the alleged shooter will be in the hospital. We do know that within hours of being taken into custody, he already had made it clear to deputies he would not be cooperating with the investigation. Joining us now to talk more about this case and where it goes from here is former NYPD detective and host of the Gold Shields podcast, Tom Smith. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us for this. As we look at Phoenix Eichner's background, I don't think anybody has sympathy for Phoenix Eichner because he had a bad childhood with what he's alleged to have done. There's a ton of people that grow up in broken families and they don't end up allegedly opening fire on a college campus. But when you look at his background and what he's accused of doing, what stands out to you?
Well, his involvement in wanting to be part of a police agency or department really stood out, and the thought he had of a future in that really stands out, because then you just start to wonder what went wrong, what happened. The upbringing thing, I don't buy. There's many people that have rougher childhoods and growing up problems, and it didn't even seem to be that bad. So a lot of these assailants, lean back on something and fall back on an excuse of why they did it. And they'll come up with anything. And I think that's just what this is, an excuse of his criminal activity.
Yeah, because you look at, it seemed like on the surface that this would be somebody, if you're running a youth group for a police agency, that this is the type of person you're looking for, seems very interested in bridging the gap between people within the community. And then you talk to some of the students who will say that he had some extremist views. But it seems like there's just this person in 2021, I think he put in that application. And then you get to this point where you're opening fire allegedly on a school campus. How do investigators go about, and he's not cooperating, go about figuring out how he made the leap from that application and the person we read there to then the person he is now?
Yep. Most of the time in these cases is always red flags. And it's just a matter of these investigators digging and finding them on his social media posts, on his phone, on his computer, conversations he may have had with others. It's going to be digging into his past of where this went wrong and where these ideas, popped into his head. But in every case, in every school shooting case that I can remember, even the one that I was lucky enough to stop a few years ago, there's always a precursor to these and a leaping off point. And that's where they need to get to, of where this actually went wrong, and then take it from there. They have him alive. He is not cooperating, but maybe that changes one day and he opens up a little bit about, what took place in leading up to this.
I want to know what type of incident were you able to stop?
We had a threat of a school shooting in my town where I was working in the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force at the time. And we got a tip that there was going to be a school shooter. He was targeting the school. And we spent day and night doing everything we could to track him, get his social media posts, get search warrants together. And we had a target date of the last day of school. And luckily, we're able to arrest him about 2 days before the end of school. And during the search warrant, found the sketch of the classroom he was going to do it in, and also the hit list of the 5 students he was aiming to kill.
What is the moment like when you find that type of evidence and realize what you actually were able to stop?
Oh, it was incredible. We knew what he was thinking. We knew what was on his mind, but then to find the classroom sketch and the hit list was just an added kind of bonus of getting this all together, where we knew it was going. He was dangerous, and what he was thinking and what he was about to carry out, on top of the searches that he was doing on Google and social media posts and all that. And that's what I mean about this young kid. They need to go backwards in time and find a beginning of this, because there is always a beginning to this.
Right.
So that's really interesting to me, guys. First of all, I'm always happy to hear that a school shooting was thwarted, right? But he, time and time again, there is red flags, right? There's something that they're saying, whether it's in social media to other students. There is a beginning, just like he's saying. And we even heard where some of the kids were saying, sadly, I wasn't surprised that it was him. Really? Then why didn't you say something? Right? We tend to bury our heads in the sand and not look up and not pay attention. And then we're surprised when someone that we thought was capable of something like this, in fact, carries it out. It happens over and over and over again. When are we going to learn? And I'm talking about the general public, kids in schools. So, if any young people are out there and you're in college, keep your head up, look, listen. And if you see something that's wrong, seriously, guys, cops are going to appreciate you going to them. They are. No matter how small you may think it is, no matter how insignificant you think it is, it matters. So please, if you know something, say something.
Because there were enough students that came forward that just said that, I think he got kicked out of a free speech class, which says, it says a lot that they were encouraging people to speak up, but he was at the point where I think the person who was running the class said our only rule was no Nazis. And it seems like he broke that. So it's like, how do you get to that point where you're having such aggressive views? Unfortunately, we've had so many examples of school shootings, mass shootings, where we start to dive into the beliefs of the people who are responsible. Just in your time in working these types of cases, what are some of the similarities that you see in the profiles of the people who do these things?
Yeah, some are, wanting to be famous and wanting to be like the people they're looking up to, whether it's Columbine, which was the case in my investigation. He was a big fan of the Columbine shooters, or the Parkland shooting down in Florida. They want to be famous. They want to be on the news. They want to be as equal as these other, assailants who are always known now, even by name. They want to be that. And you have this bullying concept as well, but that always seems to be, as I said earlier in the interview, a fallback. That's always an excuse. There's always more to it than just that. And it's nailing that down because, like I said, there's always a beginning. There's always a tipping point of where someone just goes wrong and where they want to get to. And that's what needs to be done in this case. So other investigators who are going to be dealing with these cases are just educated on to where to look and how to look, questions to ask, searches to do, just to possibly stop this from happening before it happens in the future.
His stepmom had served with the Leon County Sheriff for 20 years. She was reportedly a school resource officer. She was recognized as an employee of the month last year. But it was one of her guns that police say that her stepson used in this shooting at Florida State. What kind of trouble could she be in?
Yeah, it depends on the circumstances around that weapon. I could see it being more on a department level disciplinary action than anything, especially if it was locked up, if it was in a safe box, but then the investigators need to talk to her about who had access to it. Was it a key? Was it a combination? Whatever it might have been. How often did he possibly go shooting with her? Was any of that even a thing? So there's a lot to be, kind of unwrapped with that. They're keeping pretty quiet about those circumstances. So those are going to probably play out over the next week, a couple of weeks or months ahead.
Because a lot of people thought about like the Crumbly case in Michigan, which was a high school shooting. In Georgia, not far from Atlanta, you had Winder, Georgia, the shooting with the Gray family. And those were cases where parents either gifted guns or allowed their children to have access to firearms. But in those specific cases, they were under the age of 18. In this case, he was a college student, legally an adult. How does that factor into when looking at the stepmom, what type of responsibility she could have had in this?
Yeah, like I said, a lot depends on the investigation, Chris, because in those other cases, there was a knowledge of the preparations or thought process that these kids were going through. I don't think as of now that's the case with this, but that can change. It all depends on, what his state of mind was. And listen, kids can hide a lot in their emotions and what their thoughts are, even from their parents. So a lot is going to be interviews that are conducted with her, searches of his room, searches of the house to see if there is any other evidence that's in common areas that are talking about something like this, or his searches on his computer. So a lot of it is going to be interviews and searches of the house and in and around the area.
Yeah, we haven't heard yet what his social media. We knew he had social media from like Facebook and Instagram, and he was on X as well. But I have yet to hear about some of those other platforms that it seems like we hear about in some of these specific cases. It'll be interesting if he was active on those. What does the investigation look like at this point, where he'll be charged with some serious offenses once he's released from the hospital, but what more needs to be done as this case continues to be put together?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Just because he's under arrest and he's injured doesn't mean the investigation stops. They know what happened, obviously, from the event, but there's a lot still to do. Like I said, an evidentiary collection of anything that can put a case together. You still need to put a case together from the district attorney's standpoint. So there's going to be evidence collected. There's going to be numerous interviews being conducted from anyone he had contact with, friends, family, school, teachers, anyone that was involved in his life is going to be interviewed about a state of mind or anything that was said. And like you said, a deep, deep dive into his social media accounts. And I am going to be shocked if nothing is found on those social media accounts, because just in past cases, that always seems to be kind of an outlet of letting your feelings and emotions out when it comes to something like this. That, and for some reason, there's always a diary somewhere of thoughts being written down in a book. So if that's not found as well, or manifesto, whatever you want to call it, if something like that isn't found, I'll also be very surprised.
He's not cooperating with authorities, and apparently he made that clear pretty quickly, because I think the sheriff gave a news conference within 4 hours of the event happening, and then by that point he said that he wasn't cooperating with the investigation. But with the evidence that's there, the amount of people that could say he was the person that did this, the deep dive that will go into his social media, do you even really need him to cooperate with it? Certainly would make it easier, but do you really need him to cooperate with the investigation to get a conviction?
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's the norm. It's more normal not to have the assailant or suspect cooperating with police other than not. So I'm not surprised at that one bit, because he was kind of familiar with, the criminal justice system or police work. So he's going to be quiet, but that doesn't have any impact on the investigation or the prosecution of him going forward at all.
Is there the possibility for, and I know this might be more of a lawyer type question, but depending on his interactions with people online, I mean, that he could face, he hasn't been officially charged yet, but like federal charges that could go even further. Who knows who he was talking to online? Maybe he was talking to somebody in another state.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, crossing the state lines on the internet is certainly part of the federal system and something they can look at if threats or, communications were done with a thought process of committing a crime. That can always be added later if the federal government, the FBI for certain, will get involved to see if that is an avenue to go after him as well.
When in your cases, and maybe even the one that you stopped, if you're able to talk to the parents of the person who's accused of committing this type of crime or someone who is planning to commit this type of crime, how often are they aware that they had someone in their house that could be capable of something like that?
Not often, because it's your kid. You're not looking at it that way, and that's just a human nature. You're not looking at it as my son or daughter can be like this. So, and like I said, kids are very secretive when it comes to certain things. They're not going to let their parents know what they're thinking, even on what they're doing on a weekend, much less what they are planning on doing possibly at school. So, those conversations can take place, but a lot of times it's different than what the reality of it is.
One thing for me that's just been so concerning as we've covered so many of these cases is the internet activity and these apps that, whether it's a video game app that's, where people can communicate, or it's a something like Discord or Telegram. We've heard of them, being involved with people having communications like that. But then I think of Columbine, and that was before social media was even a thing. Like, for you, as you look at this, is it more prevalent that people have these types of ideas, or is it that social media allows us to see people who are capable of these things and potentially stop them before they happen, or unfortunately after the fact, be able to have more evidence to get them behind bars?
Yeah, right. I mean, I've had numerous conversations. Like, when I was a kid growing up, none of this ever happened. You never had school shootings. You never had anyone even thinking about this. But then Columbine happens, and then the world of social media comes into play. And what it does, Chris, it gives people with this ideology or this way of thinking to communicate with possibly other people who think the same way. So what does that do? That ramps up the conversation. That puts more ideas into these kids' heads from other people that they're in contact with, other than just kind of being by yourself in your room. So the possibility of being egged on or cheered on about doing something is more prevalent, and more, the opportunities there more with the age of social media and having so much contact with people around the world that can influence you.
How do you, and especially with your work with the FBI as well, because it just seems like it's so prevalent on social media that people have twisted thoughts, but then it gets to the point where someone could say that they're planning to commit an attack. And for each time that there's an arrest or unfortunately an incident happens, it seems like there's just an infinite amount of people, way more than you would ever think, that are saying these things online. How do you go about, whether it's the FBI or even the NYPD, to be able to track people who do that and actually stop these things from happening?
Right. The problem is, and it's not a problem, and I don't mean it that way, but the First Amendment, you can post and say anything you want, and that's the beauty of this country. But then it's the follow-up to that is concerning, and what has to be, checked out or tracked. But I say this all the time, and I've said it in colleges I've spoken in, and the NYPD Academy as well, that the police can't be everywhere, but the public can be. People and kids and students and teachers need to be more aware of these red flags that are said online in a classroom during a conversation that is going to, kind of get your attention. There's always something that's said in the planning stages of this that people are going to see and have to realize it's not right. I tell people all the time, you have a gut feeling about something, 99% of the time you're going to be right about it. So notify a teacher, notify a parent, notify the police if there's something concerning online, like what if questions. What if someone went into the school and shot it up? Pictures of guns, pictures of shotguns, pictures of past school shooters. All of that is meaning something. And people need to realize what those red flags are and bring it to the attention of the authorities.
Yeah.
There you go, guys. Couldn't have said it better myself. Like I said, young people out there need to be paying attention. Guys, when someone is, quote, strange, unquote, or weird, or talks bragging about guns that they may have, or like they said, other school tragedies, people who committed those are all red flags. Every single one of them. Like he said, if you have a feeling in your gut, 99% of the time, you're going to be right. Cops are not going to care about that 1% of the time that you're wrong. They really aren't. They're going to be happy that you brought it to their attention. They are. So if anyone is out there and is hearing this, I pray that you'd listen to your gut. Pay attention. Keep your head up out of the sand and do what is right. Not just for your school, but for yourself. Because you could be the next victim. And I hate to think of it that way. Our children should not have to worry about that. But that's the reality of today. Our children are our future. And any parents out there, if your child suddenly starts acting differently, get them help. Get them whatever help they need. And don't let them tell you anything different. Sit them down, try to talk to them yourself, send them to a counselor, whatever you have to do. And don't, above all, allow them to have access to your firearms. Protect yourself as well as your child. Guys, I want to thank you for being here today. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please hit the like button on your way out. Hit the subscribe button and the notification, turn that to all, because we do go online most nights about 5 p.m. Central Time. And we're building a great community that's drama-free and safe for you to participate in. We'd love to have you there. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching another episode of Granny's Crime Busters. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Don't forget to subscribe and like and even share the content. You can follow us on any of our other social media platforms at YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We really appreciate you guys, and you can also email us at grannyscrimebusters@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.